Hello everyone, my name is Lydia and welcome. Today we're going to be painting green poison. I'll go over the materials that you need to do the painting and I'll also list those materials down in the description box below the video. And for those of you that have subscribed to my channel, I'd like to take a moment to say thank you. So grab something to stay hydrated, your paints and your brushes, and I'll see you back here at the easel. The materials I'm going to be using today are an 8 by 10 inch stretched and primed canvas. I have this turned on the horizontal. You certainly can change the size of the canvas if you'd like. I'm using acrylic paints and the colors on my palette today are Alizarin Crimson, Yellow Ochre, Pthalo Green, Paynes Gray, and Titanium White. And you can change those colors as you need as well. The brushes I'm going to be using today are a 1 inch flat brush, a 1/2 inch filbert brush, a smaller filbert brush to get into some of the small places. This happens to be a number 4, but remember that the numbers vary depending on the paint company. I'm going to be using a Posca pen today. This is just a pen that has a brush tip. You certainly could use a small round brush in place of the Posca pen if you don't have one, and use either your Paynes Gray paint or some black paint. I'm also going to be using today a little bit of matte medium. You certainly don't need this. You can use water to thin your paints if you like, but this just helps the paint to flow a little better. You're also going to want to have a jar of water for rinsing your brushes and a mister bottle for keeping everything nice and damp. I'm going to start by putting a background on my canvas. And one thing I want to think about is where the placement of my wall is going to be compared to where my tabletop is going to be that has the bottle resting on it. So I'm going to come down, I want to come down maybe about 1/2 inch below halfway. So I'm going to go ahead and get some paint on my brush. I'm just going to pick up a little bit of this Paynes Gray, just a tad bit, just so I can make some marks. So I'm just going to put a little bit on my brush. And I know that if I come down about halfway, I want to come a little bit below that, so maybe about 1/2 inch. I'm just going to put a little dot of paint there. And then I'm going to come over and do the same thing on the other side. And one thing I can do is just hold my brush against the canvas, put my finger where that mark is, and come over here and put another little mark on this side. So now that I have my mark here and here, then I can draw a nice straight line across. And if you don't draw straight lines, there are a few things that you can do. So one thing you can do is you can use a ruler to draw a straight line across, of course, or you can just take some low tack painter's tape and you can actually put that, you can line it up across the canvas. So if you feel like you didn't get the line quite straight the way you wanted it, you can stick your low tack tape and make sure that you press it down so that it sticks really well on the canvas, especially where you want that straight line to be. And once you have that on and it's nice and straight to your liking, you can go ahead and start to paint along the top. So this is just a little tip for you. So what I want to do is I have some Paynes Gray on my brush from putting the little mark up there, but I'm going to go ahead and press into my white. I want to get a lot of this white into my brush. I already have a little bit of the Paynes Gray in my brush, but if you don't have any Paynes Gray left from making a mark, just pick up a little tiny dot of the Paynes Gray. I'm also going to go get a little tiny dot of my Alizarin Crimson. So what I'm thinking in my mind is that I want my light source to be coming from this side of the canvas. So I'm going to go from a lighter gradation to a darker gradation over on this side. And I'm just going to work for now above my painter's tape so you can see how this works. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to make crisscross strokes And I'm going to pick up a little bit of my matte medium as well. I'm going to come back in and get just white. I'm not going to get any color on the brush. Some matte medium and maybe a little bit of my water, just so things blend a little better as I'm moving across the canvas. And I'm going to come down to my little painter's tape here. And once I get this side of the canvas, I'm going to come down, I'm going to pick up a little bit more of the Paynes Gray. I'll get some more white, but I'm not going to get as much white. And then I'm going to dip into a little bit of the red. I'm going to take a little bit of that off. So I have a little red, a little black, and a little white as I start to move across the canvas. And I'm going to start this time in this top corner of my canvas, and it's going to be a little darker. And if you find the paint's not spreading, you can wet your brush, or you can get a little bit of that matte medium. You can do a little bit of both if you have both available to you. And I'm just going to start to blend here. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to come back in, get a little bit more of the white, a drop of the Paynes Gray, and a drop of the Alizarin, and come back in the middle and just start to work these two together. Get a little bit more white because that's getting a little too pink for me, and a little bit more of my Paynes Gray, and just mix that in. And then I'm going to wet my brush. I'm not taking the paint out of it. I'm just going to give a nice broad stroke across the canvas just to make sure everything is blended. And one thing you can do if you want to is work a couple of layers into your painting. So if you feel like you want to go back in and do the same process again, or maybe you've decided that, oh, I don't really like an area of the background I just put on. I want a little area to be a little darker here or a little lighter there. You certainly can do that as well. And again, I'm just going to go straight across. And I'm just giving it a really light touch here. Just really light, not heavy at all. Colors can blend a little bit. You could have a mottled background if you like. So I'm going to let this dry. Before I do that, I'm going to go ahead and peel off my piece of tape. So you can see I have a nice straight line now, so that this actually looks like an area where a nice built table can go. But I'm going to let this top layer dry before I go down and do the bottom layer. So once you've let this completely dry, you've got your wall color the way that you want it, what you can do now is you can flip this over, and it's a longer process than just blending down, which you certainly can do, but I wanted to show this to you. You take a piece of low-tack tape like you did before, and you line it up with the area that you've already painted, and make sure that you've completely allowed your paint to dry. And then you'll take this down and you'll make sure that you burnish the top part of the tape at least, so that you don't have any paint that seeps through. And I'm going to go from dark to light, because when I flip this back over, I want the lighter part to be toward the back of my table and the darker part to be down in the front corner. I'm going to use the same colors, but with a little less of the Alizarin Crimson, and I'm still using my 1-inch flat brush. So I'm going to come back in. I'm going to pick up some of my white again, pressing that into my brush. I'm going to go ahead down here and pick up a little bit of my blending medium. You can certainly get some water. And I'm going to pick up, I don't want too much of the Paynes Gray, but I want enough of the Paynes Gray that it's a little darker down in the bottom. And I'm going to get just a little tiny hint of my Alizarin Crimson. So you can see the brush is mostly loaded with white. I've got some black, and I've got a tiny bit of the Alizarin Crimson. So now what I'm going to do is I'm just going to start from top down to where my tape is. So making crisscross strokes. And I want the darkest colors to be across the top. And I just went in and got a little bit more water just so it'll blend a little better. And I still have some of this color on my brush, so still some of the pink and the Paynes Gray. And I'm gonna see what happens if I go back in and just pick up white this time. So I'm gonna pick up some of my titanium white, press that into the bristles of my brush, get some of my blending medium, and I'm gonna start just below where my paint area is and just start blending this up into that. I'm going to dip into my water, get out the excess, and just start working that in. So I feel like I want to come down just a little bit more with a little bit more color here, not so much white. So I'm going to dip into my Paynes Gray a little bit and a tiny bit of my Alizarin Crimson and quite a bit of white. I want it to be more white, and come back in and just work that again. I started just below where the darker area was, and I'm just coming down, and I like that better. And again, I'm just going to take my brush and just sweep across. And you can do water, or you can do a little bit more of your blending medium, whichever works for you. And again, if you need to do 2 layers of this, you certainly can. Cover up that little mark I made. I'm going to go in and pick up just a little bit more of my titanium white and come down in here and just put some white here. There we go, so that's just white only, and just blend that across. So once you've done the layers that you want to do, you feel like it's to your liking, then you can start to peel your tape back. And that way you have a nice straight line. So I'm gonna let this dry. I'll probably hit it a little bit with my blow dryer. If you're using a blow dryer, just remember to use your blow dryer on a cool setting, because heat is not friendly to acrylic paints. You can make them crack. So here's my wall space and here's my table space. So I'm going to rinse out my 1-inch flat brush because I'm not going to be using that for the remainder of the painting. And I'm going to go ahead, and when I come back, I will have the drawing on the painting, and I will post a photo of the final painting so that you can actually use that for reference. So let's go ahead and get this dry, and we'll come on back and start doing the rest of the painting. Okay, so once everything dried, I went ahead and sketched in my bottle. And I decided to put my bottle in about 1.5 inches from the left side of my canvas and about 1 inch up from the bottom. You can certainly place it over on your other side of the canvas if you like. Just make sure, I always think about dividing my canvas into thirds and placing things on the third so it remains interesting. Now we're going to take our 1/2 inch filbert brush, and I'm going to start to fill in the green. I'm going to have all of my potion fill the bottle. So I'm going to take my brush, dip it in the water, get it damp, and wipe off any excess water. I'm going to come over to my Pthalo Green, flip this around, it's my Pthalo Green. And you can use quite a bit of water here, or you can dip down into your blending medium, and that'll keep your paint transparent. And that's why I'm using blending medium. I'm going to just pick up a drop of the titanium white. I don't want it to be too light right now because we are going to be adding some more layers to it. And once I get that on my brush, I'm just going to go ahead and just start filling in the bottle. And I'm going around, this square here is my label. So I'm going around my label. And I'm just putting the base coat on. And if you want to wait, because we're going to be moving into our small brush to get up in these little areas up here. So I'm going to get up as close as I can with this brush just to kind of get it filled in. And then we can go back in and kind of get the smaller areas so we don't have to worry about straight lines as much when we get our smaller brush. And I made these two lines here at an angle because that's going to be how my shadow is going to go. And we'll fill that in just a little bit. So once I have this filled in with my bigger filbert brush, I'm going to rinse this out and pick up my smaller filbert brush that we have. So I'm going to get it wet and come in. I'm going to go ahead and get up in here. Since it's a tighter fit, I can use this little brush to get into those small little crevices of the bottle. Okay, so with my light source coming from this side, I want everything on this side of the bottle to be a little lighter, and then the middle tone here can stay here, and then I'm going to have everything a slight bit darker on this side. So what I'm going to do now is I'm going to take this Pthalo Green, this color that I have mixed up with a little bit of that blending medium in it. So I'm picking up a little bit of my Paynes Gray and mixing that in. And I still want it to be green, but it's going to be a darker green, and I'm going to go in and pick up a hint of that white. And I'm going to come in on this side of my bottle. So this is my darker side. And I'm going to start to fill in on this side with the darker green. And I'm just going right up to the edge. Then I'm going to add a little bit more white to that to make it a little less intense with the color. And I'm going to come in beside my green. And start working in that middle section of color. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take the same color and I'm going to just get a really small amount of my alizarin, a little bit more blending medium, and a little bit more white. Because we want to think about our bottle being a little lighter on this side where the light source is coming in. And because we have that pink in the background, or the Alizarin Crimson with the white makes it look a little more pink, we want to also include that in our bottle because the bottles are reflecting what's around it. And I'm going to put that especially on this lighter side. Get a little more water, pick up a little bit more of that paint, that same color, and just go along the edge. So what we're essentially doing is, since we have such a nice limited palette here, we're playing with levels of our phthalo green of varying shades of dark and light. So the white working into it with a little bit of the Alizarin Crimson even, and then the Paynes Gray to make it a little darker, and still with a little bit of the Alizarin Crimson in it. So I'm going back to the dark. So I want to think about my bottle down in here. It's a round bottle, so I'm going to give a little bit of darkness of that green sitting down in here. Add just a little bit more Paynes Gray to that green. Starting to, that's not quite dry yet. So you see how it's starting to lift my paint off here? It's not quite dry. So I'm going to give that a little bit more time to dry. And I'm going to go back over onto this other edge, mix some more Paynes Gray into my darker green. And come back over on this side and darken over in here. So if you ever see your paint lifting off, I tend to do that sometimes because I'm working through the painting so much that I don't give it the chance to dry that it needs. It just means that you just need to give your painting some time to dry a little more. And that's the same thing there. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to take quite a bit of this white. We need to give the bottle some time to dry down there. And this thick area up here is going to be white, but it's going to be reflecting quite a bit of the green. So I want it to be a really, really lighter green. So I'm going to come up, I've mixed in quite a bit of titanium white into my phthalo green color, and I'm going to come up in here and go ahead and get this in. Pick up a little bit more of that white in there. We're definitely going to be adding some more colors, of layers of color here. And I am going to pick up a hint of this Paynes Gray and add to that just a little bit. So on this side it's going to be a bit darker. And we'll come back in and add just a few lines here and there that will allow it to make sense. There we go. And I'm going to take this lighter color again. So I'm coming back down into my titanium white. And this little area here that's the top of the bottle, I'm going to go ahead and put that in as well. So I press my brush pretty flat so I can get a nice edge on my brush and just go around. And again, we'll be coming back in, so don't hold your breath. Just relax as you're moving around the top of your bottle. The great thing about acrylic paints is once they dry, if you did something that was out of not to your liking, you certainly can go back and fix it very easily. Get a little bit of Paynes Gray and come back down into this little bottom area here. And we will show the difference between where that top rim is and where the bottle, thick part of the bottle is here before it goes down into the neck. I'm still going to give that a little bit more time to dry. I'm going to rinse out the paint that I have in my brush out, and I'm going to start to come into my yellow ochre. And I'm going to bring in a hint of my Paynes Gray and a little touch of white. So I'm mixing up a yellowy green color. So I'm going to come down and just go ahead and fill in my label with my yellow paint. I actually have my arm resting on the base of my easel because I'm having to draw straight lines. If you have a maul stick, you can certainly use that. I don't really like maul sticks. I feel like they're too stiff for me because I like the movement of the arm. So I just rest my arm that's working on my forearm and work. Add a little bit of white to that and just start working that in. And I'm going to use the same paint color for my cork. I'm going to bring in a little bit of white into this color that I've mixed with my Paynes Gray and this yellow ochre. So I'm going to pull up some white into that. I'm going to bring it down at the bottom. And I'm going to make this side of my cork a little lighter. And I'm going to make my stroke make a little sweeping motion so it looks like there's some roundness to it, so it's almost like a little U. And then I'll go back and add the dark color on the opposite side. So I'm picking up the Paynes Gray and the yellow ochre to kind of blend a little bit better. I need a little bit more Paynes Gray in that, I think. There we go. Okay, and so while we're here, I'm going to get that paint out of my brush. Once I get all the yellow paint out of my small filbert brush, I want to start to think about where my shadow is going to be. So I'm going to bring my shadow across at more of an angle. So I'm going to bring in some of the Pthalo Green and Paynes Gray and just a hint of white. I want this to be a little bit more Paynes Gray, but not a whole lot. So I do want it to appear so the light is reflecting some of this, the green onto my table here. So I'm just going to start to work in some, I'm just scrubbing on some area here. I'm going to keep for now a little area between my bottle and the shadow until I figure out exactly how I want my shadow to be. So make a little line here. And I'm going to go back and blend in a little bit of this white and soften it a little bit more. I'm going to get a little bit more, I'm going to get a little blending medium on my brush here and just kind of blend that out. And I'm going to start to think about the shape of the bottle. So the bottle goes up and in and then comes into that little round thick part here, and then my cork pokes up, and we can certainly adjust it later on down the road. For right now, I'm just trying to get an idea of how I want this shadow to be, how long I want it to be, how long is the shadow, because shadows can be skinny or long just depending on how you're casting that, how the shadow is casting on the table. And I'm going to wet my brush. I'm actually going to dip into my medium and just blend that out. And it's not too thick of a paint here. You still can see some of that. This is where the glazing medium helps. You can still see some of the color of the table in there, and we will go back in and kind of put a little bit of brightness here and there. I'm gonna go ahead and pick up a little bit of this Alizarin Crimson, mix it into the white with whatever's on my brush, and just go in and kind of sweep that in so it's a really light pinky green color. Just kind of working that in. And we will get the shadow more refined once we finish our bottle. All right, so we're gonna let that stand. I know it looks a little strange right now, but we're gonna let that dry. Okay, so now that we've given this a little bit of time to get set, I'm going to go ahead and start putting in the lights and the darks a little more and some of the reflective light on the bottle. So down through here, we want it to be darker. So that's gonna be the Paynes Gray and the green mix. That's a little bit dark on the darker side of the spectrum. So I'm gonna mix that up. Can add a little bit of that Alizarin Crimson to it. I don't want too much. And a hint of the white. So it's a darker color. Let's see how this looks. I do want it to be a little bit more green than that though. There we go. Okay, I'm liking that. So I'm mixing this up with my filbert, my larger filbert brush, but I really want to use my smaller one. So I'm going to get that color on my brush and come on down here. So this is the Pthalo Green, Paynes Gray, a little hint of the Alizarin Crimson, and I'm going to use my smaller brush so I can get down into this little area a little better and make a little circle down at the bottom. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to take some of this green up into the outer edge of the bottle on the darker side where the shadow is, and just kind of make little small circular motions. And then I'm going to add some white to this same color, just adding some white and coming in and just bringing that into the middle. This is our little second layer to kind of tell us that this bottle is a little round. A little bit more of that lighter color. I'm going to go back and pick up a little bit of the dark on this edge. There we go. And blend that over. And then I'm going to get quite a bit of the titanium white, and I'm going to actually just rub out what is on my brush. So that green Paynes Gray mixture, I'm going to come on this side and just start to, I need it a little bit more green because I don't want it to get too white yet. And I'm going to come on this side and just start hitting along the edge here. Get a little bit more of that green in there. Because I don't want it to be my final reflective light yet. There we go. And maybe I'll just hit some right in here so that it'll give the appearance of the bottle being a little more round. Get a little bit more green on my brush and just come in and blend that in. I am liking that, and I am going to do my Paynes Gray and green mixture and start to put a little bit of that, just a little bit mixed with some white up in the very top portion here. That's the thickest part of the glass. And then I'm going to take a little bit of the Paynes Gray mixture on the darker side. So just like over here, I want this side of the thick neck part here to be a little darker. Maybe even a little bit more of that Paynes Gray coming through over here. And then a little bit more white mixed into that, coming over on this side. And then where the two shall meet, I will make little circular motions and get that in there. There we go. And now what I'm going to do is I'm going to rinse this paint on my brush. And what I can do, I actually came down here and drew in a little bit more of how my shadow is going to be. So you can just go ahead and fill that in with this leftover paint. Get a little bit of the white and the pink, or the white and the Alizarin Crimson, and just kind of blend that out a little bit. Now that that is a little bit on the lighter side, I'm going to come into the shadow here. Go ahead and get that in there and pull that out. Get a little bit of that Paynes Gray and Green and just start working that a little bit more. And I have some Alizarin Crimson in there because that's what's all around. It's going to be casting a little bit of that shadow. And then I want some of the dark green and the Paynes Gray down here, because your shadow is actually, you want to make sure that it's going to be touching underneath the bottle there. As we continue to start to get some of that paint off my brush. Get a little bit more of that lighter color, bring it in here and blend that out a little more. Just making sure that these colors kind of blend together. So I just wet my brush and I'm going across these colors. All right, so what I'm going to do now is I'm going to get this paint out of my brush. And I want to definitely have mostly white. So I'm going to make a little bit of a reflective curve here and here. So the bottle now is going to start to show a little bit of glassiness, if that's the word. So I'm going to take my white and I'm going to add just a really, really small amount, just a really, really small amount of the crimson. And I want my first curve of the bottle with the light showing to come down and out where the curve is. So I'm on the tip of my brush and I'm just going to come down and follow the curve of the bottle. And I'm going to do that on both sides. So like that. And then what I'm going to do is I'm going to put just a little line right there. And I'm going to blend it with a little bit with my finger. And then on the bottom here, I've got this really dark area. I'm going to create an area around that circle and just kind of blot it out with my finger there. And then on this side of the bottle, I may have a few little light bits hidden on this side of the bottle for sure. And this is where my light source is. And on this side, I'm going to put a little green into this part here. And then I'm going to get mostly white with that Alizarin Crimson and come back in. And this can be just white if you want it to be. And get that very top part. And I want this to be a little bit more parched looking. So I'm going to take my white into my yellow ochre, maybe pick up some of that blending medium. And I'm just going to come into mostly the center part of this and a little bit more yellow than that. And just kind of bring that into the center, keeping the edges still kind of aged looking, but I want the center part to be just a little bit brighter on my label. And the same up here where the light might be hitting a little more. I'm just going to start bringing some of that brighter yellow up into this area. And then I'll go back just into my yellow ochre and a little bit of that Paynes Gray, and come back over on this side and make it a little darker on the side that's getting less of the light. Sometimes it's good just to step back and take a look. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I want to make the bottom part of my jar a little rounder. So I'm going to pick up some of my, that medium green color. I'm going to bring it right here. There we go. All right. And then I'm going to take some of the Paynes Gray in that green mix. So I'm taking some Paynes Gray and some of the green and my white. And I want this to be a little bit more on the Paynes Gray side over on this side. So I'm just going to put a little Paynes Gray along here so we can distinguish where that top is a little better. And then I'm going to bring the Paynes Gray over here just so we can see where this side of this blend that in a little bit more, make this side a little bit more substantial. All right, so I'm going to switch to my larger filbert brush, and I'm going to get it wet, and I'm going to get a very thin layer of my Paynes Gray, and mostly green, and a little white. And you can either use quite a bit of water to get this very liquidy or use your blending medium. Let's see how this looks, because I want this to be a little darker, but a little more. And I'm going to add a little bit of that Alizarin Crimson, so I want to add a little alizarin to that. Keeping in mind with what's around the bottle that needs to be reflected to tell the story that this is a reflection of the bottle. And then get a little bit of that Paynes Gray, and I want to put it on the very tip of the brush so that I can just kind of bring that along underneath the bottle a little bit to show that the difference between where the bottle is and where the shadow is. Pull that out. There we go. And we can go back to our smaller, so I'm switching back to the smaller brush here. Same thing though, just working with that green and Paynes Gray. Now is where we're working a little quicker so we can kind of even things out on that shadow. Maybe even incorporate a little bit, just a hint of that yellow and blend that in there so you know you don't really know it's there, but it's there. And then maybe a little bit of that's being reflected from the label. And then I'm going to get a little bit of my Paynes Gray. I want it to be a little dark right in here. Connect that shadow. So I want it to look like this bottle is resting solidly on the table. So I'm going to put a little shadow right along in here. Blend that out. And just work some of that Paynes Gray in here. So now what I'm going to do is I'm going to let this dry, and we're going to come back and we're going to put our letters in on the label of the bottle, and we're going to blend a little bit of a glaze over this shadow to make it look a little less like an item and more like a shadow. But everything needs to dry first. Okay, so what I'm going to do now is I've mixed up some white. It's mostly white, and another little the little pinpricks of Paynes Gray and the crimson. And I've got it in my brush, and I am actually just going to take this and do a little light scumbling over my shadow. I put this on my my 1/2 inch filbert brush, and then what I'm going to do is I'm actually going to take my finger, and I've got a little bit of water on the tip of my finger, and my finger is clean, and I'm just going to start using my finger. You can use the smaller brush for this if you want, but I just like the blend that I can get with my finger wet. And each time I'll go back and I'll dip a little bit into my water, and I'll wipe my finger off on my towel, and I just come in and just give this a little blend out. And that just softens that shadow for me, and it's just a really small amount of paint that I put up there. And it just gives that nice little soft look to that shadow. So a little bit of that excess paint off my brush, and I just can come back in after I blended it a little bit with my finger and do a little bit more blending out of that shadow. And then the other thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to take just titanium white, and I'm going to come back up into this back area with my medium, the 1/2 inch filbert, and I'm just going to come in and go around my bottle with just the titanium white. Not all the way around, just the back side, and more around this way where at an angle where I think I might be getting a little bit more light, and I can soften the edges around my shadow here, and just still maybe sweep some of that white into that shadow. So then what I'll do is I'll go back and wet my small filbert brush and move some of that white paint around. And again, you can use water, you can use your glazing medium for this, and it's actually going to take a little bit of that white off of my shadow and just kind of give it that little blend. I'm going to right up to the edge of my bottle there. And then I can take a little hint of my yellow ochre and go back in and just kind of give that a little work in where it was. A little bit of that white in there. So I just took a little white so I can get that little reflection of that label back in there. And while I have my little brush, I'm getting the yellow off of it. I'm going to go around. And this is where you start to make little quick decisions. I feel like there needs to be a little bit more light hitting here. maybe a little bit more light coming around on the top part of the top thick neck part of the bottle. Maybe a little line here. Let me know that there's a little reflection underneath that. And maybe even a little, if I take a little bit of that yellow again and come over on to my little cork part and make some little highlights there. So I've zoomed you in so you can see the label a little closer. I have the word poison, and I have a skull and crossbones here, and they don't have to be beautiful. You can imagine that this might be a handwritten label, and I am going to be using my Posca pen for this, and this is where you can use a small round brush if you'd like, dipped in some black paint or your Paynes Gray. So what I'm going to do, and I did pencil it in so that I can have a guide, but about midway down my label, I'm going to go ahead and put my I in the word poison so that I have the P-O on this side and the S-O-N on this side. So I have P-O-S-O-N. And then I'm going to start filling in with my Posca pen my little skull and crossbones. And remember, if you mess up, you can always come back in and fix things with your yellow ochre. So I'm going to go ahead and just start filling them in. Try to put a little bit of some teeth in there. And I went ahead and filled in this little eye over here because I'll show you how I can easily fix that. I'll go ahead and get these crossbones in. So let's just say that I messed that eye and my skull up. You can take either a fine tip brush, or you can take the end of a paintbrush and dip that in the paint and dot it in. I'm going to show you. I'm going to use this little fine tip brush, and I'm just going to dip right into my yellow ochre, just straight into it. Make sure I don't have too much paint on the end. I just need a little dot. And I can just come back in and just do my little dot. Just like that. So now all that's left to do is to sign it, and I'm going to sign my painting over here. And I did get a small liner brush. You can sign it with however you want, a small round brush. I'm using a mix of Paynes Gray, that little alizarin color. Thanks everybody for keeping me company today, and I hope you created something really special for yourself. Don't forget, if you like this video, please hit the like button and subscribe. Until next time, bye-bye.